In 1692, in a small Puritan town in Massachusetts, the law didn't need evidence. It needed fear. 19 people were hanged. One man was crushed to death. Hundreds were accused. And it all started with a few teenage girls. But here's what most American history classes never fully explain: the Salem Witch Trials weren't just about superstition. They were about power, land, revenge, and a justice system that failed spectacularly. Tonight, we're going beyond the textbook version of the Salem Witch Trials, and into the darker truth hiding underneath. Fear in a fragile colony. In 1692, Salem was not just a village. It was a pressure cooker. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was unstable. There were recent smallpox outbreaks. Ongoing frontier wars with Native American tribes. Political uncertainty after the loss of the original colonial charter. People were anxious, suspicious, deeply religious. Puritan leaders believed Satan was actively working against their community. And when fear mixes with religious certainty, paranoia doesn't feel irrational, it feels righteous. Then came the girls. In the home of Reverend Samuel Parris, his daughter and niece began experiencing violent fits, screaming, convulsing, claiming invisible spirits were attacking them. The local doctor had no medical explanation. So he gave the only diagnosis that made sense in 1692. Witchcraft. The first accused was Tituba, an enslaved woman in the Parris household. She was an easy target, foreign, marginalized, different. Under intense interrogation, Tituba confessed. But here's the part that history books often rush past. Her confession didn't calm the town. It ignited it. She described a network of witches working with the devil. She named others. And suddenly, fear had direction. Accusations spread rapidly. Neighbors accused neighbors. Children accused adults. Servants accused masters. And once accused, proving innocence became nearly impossible, because the court began accepting something deeply dangerous. Spectral evidence, testimony that a person's spirit appeared in a dream or vision to torment someone. No physical proof. No witnesses. Just fear, treated as fact. And that's when Salem stopped being a religious panic and started becoming something much more calculated. Power, property, and political control. As the accusations spread across Salem, something strange began to happen. The pattern wasn't random. Many of the accused weren't social outcasts. They weren't all poor. They weren't all rebellious women. Some were landowners. Some were outspoken critics. Some were connected to long-standing property disputes inside the village. And in a small colonial town, land wasn't just wealth, it was survival. The economic divide. Salem was split between two factions. Salem Village, more rural, farming families. Salem Town, wealthier, more commercial, connected to trade. There were simmering tensions between families who wanted economic independence and those who wanted tighter ties to the larger town economy. When accusations began, they often followed these fault lines. Families already involved in legal disputes suddenly found themselves facing witchcraft charges. Coincidence? Or convenience? The court that changed everything. When the crisis intensified, Governor William Phipps established a special court. Court of Oyer and Terminer. This court allowed the use of spectral evidence, meaning dreams and visions could be treated as legal proof. That decision changed everything. Because once invisible evidence became admissible, accusations became unstoppable. You didn't need facts. You needed fear. And fear was abundant. Who benefited? Here's where the darker questions begin. When someone was accused, they were jailed. Their property was often seized. Legal fees piled up. Families were financially devastated. Even if acquitted, the damage was done. In some cases, neighbors who had accused them ended up acquiring land or gaining influence after the accused were gone. Was every accusation motivated by greed? No. But enough followed patterns of land conflict that modern historians still debate how much economic rivalry fueled the hysteria. Silencing dissent. There's another layer. Criticizing the trials could itself raise suspicion. One of the most chilling examples was Giles Corey. When accused, he refused to enter a plea. Under English law, that meant he could not be tried. So authorities used a brutal method known as pressing, placing heavy stones on his chest to force a plea. He never confessed. His reported final words? More weight. He was crushed to death. And here's what's often overlooked. Because he never entered a plea, his property could legally pass to his heirs, not be seized by the state. Even in death, control over property was central. By late summer of 1692, the executions continued. Fear was still the public explanation. But underneath it? Power. Land. Authority. And a legal system that had become a weapon. When the system began to crack. By the fall of 1692, even in Salem, something felt wrong. The executions had continued through the summer. 19 people had been hanged. One man had been pressed to death. Hundreds remained in jail. But the accusations were no longer targeting only the vulnerable. They were climbing the social ladder. When the powerful were accused. At first, it was easy to dismiss the accused. An enslaved woman. A poor farmer's wife. A socially awkward neighbor. But then the names became harder to ignore. Respected church members. Wealthy landowners. Even the wife of Governor William Phipps was whispered about. When fear threatens power, power reacts. And suddenly, skepticism began to surface, not because the system was unjust, but because it was becoming dangerous to the elite. The problem with spectral evidence. Even some ministers, including Cotton Mather, began urging caution about relying too heavily on spectral evidence. Dreams. Visions. Invisible attacks. The legal foundation of the trials was beginning to look unstable. And when legal systems lose credibility, authority follows. The court dissolved. In October 1692, Governor Phipps dissolved the controversial Court of Oyer and Terminer. Spectral evidence was no longer allowed. Without it, most remaining cases collapsed. Prisoners were gradually released. Executions stopped. The hysteria didn't end with a dramatic confession. It ended quietly. Almost awkwardly. As if the colony wanted to move on without fully acknowledging what had happened. America's uncomfortable memory. Years later, some officials admitted the trials had been a mistake. In 1702, the trials were declared unlawful. In 1711, financial compensation was offered to some victims' families. But the damage was permanent. Trust had been broken. Communities fractured. Lives erased. And here's the darker truth. The Salem Witch Trials became easier to frame as a story about superstition because that explanation feels safer. It suggests we're smarter now, more rational, more civilized. But Salem wasn't just about ignorance. It was about fear weaponized, authority unchecked, and a legal system that prioritized belief over evidence. The psychology of a witch hunt. The real engine behind the Salem Witch Trials wasn't magic. It was psychology. Fear as social glue. In 1692, life in Puritan New England was fragile. War on the frontier. Disease outbreaks. Political instability. Religious extremism. When societies feel unstable, they look for certainty. And sometimes, certainty comes in the form of a common enemy. Witches became that enemy. Blaming an invisible threat gave people a sense of control. It simplified chaos. It made suffering feel explainable. And once fear is given a face, it spreads fast. Mass hysteria is contagious. Modern psychologists call it collective delusion or mass psychogenic illness. When one person claims harm, others begin to interpret their own stress through the same lens. In Salem, young girls described invisible attacks. Soon, others began reporting similar experiences. Not because they were necessarily lying, but because fear is persuasive. Especially in a closed, deeply religious society. The power of moral panic. Salem wasn't just a legal failure. It was a moral panic. A moment when the community believed it was defending righteousness even while destroying innocent lives. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Moral panic doesn't disappear with time. It evolves. Modern echoes. Today, accusations don't require spectral evidence. But reputations can still collapse overnight. Online outrage. Viral allegations. Public shaming before due process. The technology is different. The psychology is not. When fear mixes with moral certainty, nuance disappears. And once again, belief can overpower evidence. Why Salem still matters. It's easy to view Salem as a primitive mistake. A relic of superstition. But that framing is comforting. Because it implies we've moved beyond it. The darker truth? Salem wasn't about witches. It was about human nature under pressure. And human nature hasn't changed. The legacy that still haunts America. By the time the Salem Witch Trials ended, the damage was irreversible. 19 executed. 1 crushed to death. Hundreds accused. Families ruined. But the deeper consequence wasn't just loss of life. It was a crisis of justice. A legal system forced to evolve. The collapse of the trials exposed a terrifying flaw. When courts accept belief as evidence, truth becomes optional. In the years that followed, colonial leaders slowly began reforming evidentiary standards. The idea that accusations required tangible proof gained strength. In many ways, Salem became an early cautionary tale that influenced how American legal principles developed, especially around due process and skepticism of coerced confessions. The Constitution would come decades later. But the memory of Salem lingered in the cultural background. The phrase that never disappeared. Centuries later, the term witch hunt is still used in American politics, media, and public life. Not because witches were real, but because the mechanism is recognizable. Public accusation. Emotional outrage. Presumption of guilt. Social pressure to conform. The phrase survives because the pattern survives. Why America softened the story. Over time, Salem was reframed. It became a story about superstition. About a primitive colony that didn't know better. That version is easier to teach. Because it separates them from us. But the more unsettling interpretation is this. Salem wasn't an anomaly. It was a stress test. And under pressure, the system failed. The uncomfortable reflection. The people of Salem weren't monsters. They were ordinary. Religious. Family-oriented. Convinced they were protecting their community. That's what makes it disturbing. Because it suggests that injustice doesn't require evil villains. It only requires fear, authority, and enough people willing to believe. Final closing. So the next time you hear the phrase witch hunt, remember. It isn't just a metaphor. It's a reminder of how quickly justice can collapse when emotion overrides evidence. The Salem Witch Trials weren't just a dark chapter in early American history. They were a warning. And warnings only matter if we're willing to recognize ourselves in them.